From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Simply put, does the president believe he is above the law?
Certainly no one is above the law.
As President Trump claims absolute power, the power to pardon himself and to dismiss the Mueller investigation, is the nation on a path to a constitutional crisis? We'll speak to Philadelphia Daily News columnist Will Bunch about Trump's attempts to go what Bunch calls full dictator, and about Trump's decision to disinvite the Super Bowl champions Philadelphia Eagles from the White House today. Then we go to the U.S.-Mexico border to look at how the U.S. government's breaking up families and sending children to detention centers, often hundreds of miles from their parents. This is how one judge in Brownsville, Texas, describes the situation.
What you've done, in effect, by separating these children, is you're putting them someplace without their parents. You can imagine there's a hell, and that's probably what it looks like.
And the Supreme Court rules in favor of a Colorado baker who refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple, citing his religious opposition. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Amnesty International says the U.S. airstrikes launched last year during the 2017 offensive to oust ISIS militants from the Syrian city of Raqqa were in violation of international law and potentially constitute war crimes. In Amnesty's new report, War of Annihilation, the group writes, on the ground in Raqqa, we witnessed a level of destruction comparable to anything we've seen in decades of covering the impact of wars. The report is based on interviews with more than 100 civilian survivors, including members of the Badran family, which lost 39 family members and 10 neighbors in 4 separate U.S.-led coalition airstrikes. This is Donatella Rivera from Amnesty International.
We're talking about airstrikes, which should be fairly precise. So if buildings after buildings were destroyed with entire families inside, something must have gone wrong, and that something must be investigated because the people of Raqqa deserve justice and they deserve to know what went wrong. But until now, coalition officials have refused to engage in any meaningful way.
The Wall Street Journal reports the Trump administration is considering providing direct U.S. military support toward the Saudi-led offensive to seize control of Yemen's port city of Hodeidah, in what aid groups are warning could worsen the already catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Yemen. The Journal reports the United Arab Emirates, which is part of the Saudi-led coalition fighting Houthi rebels in Yemen, has appealed to the Trump administration to provide the direct support, which would further expand the U.S. role in the ongoing war that's killed 15,000 civilians, sparked the world's worst cholera epidemic, and pushed Yemen to the brink of famine. 80% of the humanitarian aid that's able to reach Yemen comes to the port city of Hodeidah, meaning if the Saudi coalition seizes the city, it could dramatically reduce food, water, and medicine in the besieged country. In Gaza, Israeli forces have shot and killed the cousin of the 21-year-old Palestinian medic Hassan al-Najjar, who was shot and killed by an Israeli sniper Friday. Israeli soldiers shot and killed Ramzi al-Najjar near the separation fence with Israel Monday. The Israeli military is claiming he was armed with an axe. The Israeli military has killed at least 120 Palestinians and wounded over 13,000 more amidst the Palestinians' nonviolent Great March of Return protests in Gaza that started March 30th. President Trump is continuing to attack Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. On Monday, Trump tweeted, "The appointment of the special counsel is totally unconstitutional." Trump also tweeted, "As has been stated by numerous legal scholars, I have the absolute right to pardon myself." Unquote. In fact, as the New York Times reports, there's only one official opinion on whether a president can pardon himself. In August 1974, the acting head of the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel wrote in a memorandum that it would seem then President Richard Nixon could not pardon himself. A few days later, Nixon resigned. This comes as federal prosecutors for special counsel Robert Mueller have accused President Trump's former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, of attempting to tamper with the witnesses in the federal tax and money laundering case against him. Prosecutors say Manafort repeatedly tried to contact witnesses by phone and through encrypted messaging. Manafort is accused of breaking federal lobbying, tax and money laundering laws. The Supreme Court has ruled in favor of a Colorado baker who refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple, citing his religious opposition. In a narrow 7-2 decision, the justices faulted the Colorado Civil Rights Commission's handling of the claims brought against baker Jack Phillips, saying the commission had showed a hostility to religion. Though the case pitted claims of religious freedom against the fight for gay rights, the ruling stopped short of setting a major precedent on whether businesses can deny people services because of their sexual orientation. We'll have more on the Supreme Court ruling later in the broadcast. In Afghanistan, at least 14 people were killed when a suicide bomber attacked a gathering of religious leaders in the capital, Kabul, Monday. During the meeting, the clerics and religious scholars had declared suicide bombing a sin and the ongoing war in Afghanistan illegal under Islamic law. Shortly after making these proclamations, the bomber attacked the assembly. ISIS has claimed responsibility for the attack. In Jordan, anti-austerity protests continued into a fifth day despite Monday's resignation of Prime Minister Hani Mulki, who had pushed for the income tax increases backed by the International Monetary Fund. Education Minister Omar Azaz has reportedly been tapped to serve as the next prime minister. He has formerly worked for the World Bank. The ongoing protests are the biggest in Jordan in years. In Guatemala, the death toll from the eruption of the Fuego volcano has risen to 69 people. The volcanic eruption 25 miles southwest of the capital, Guatemala City, has buried whole villages in lava. The death toll is expected to rise as search and rescue efforts continue. Back in the United States, voters head to the polls today for primaries in Alabama, California, Iowa, Mississippi, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, and South Dakota. Among the races in Montana, Democrats will decide who faces off against Republican Congressmember Greg Gianforte, who physically attacked a Guardian reporter in 2017. In California, Democratic State Senator Kevin De Leon is vying to unseat Democratic U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein. Dozens of people were arrested in civil disobedience protests in cities across the United States Monday during a national day of action for the new Poor People's Campaign. Thousands of low-wage workers, clergy, and community activists participated in sit-ins, marches, and rallies calling on lawmakers to guarantee health care and a healthy environment for all. In Washington, D.C., 28 people were arrested in the Capitol Rotunda Monday while protesting the disproportionate impact of disasters such as Hurricane Maria on the poor. In Topeka, Kansas, 16 people were arrested as they demanded Medicaid expansion at the state capitol building. And in Kentucky, 400 activists were denied entry to the state capitol Monday while protesting the nation's first work requirements for Medicaid. Monday's actions are the fourth week of nonviolent direct action from the new Poor People's Campaign. On Monday, President Trump abruptly disinvited the Super Bowl winning Philadelphia Eagles from visiting the White House today, tweeting, "Staying in the locker room for the playing of our national anthem is as disrespectful to our country as kneeling. Sorry," unquote. During last year's NFL season, no Eagles player took a knee. NFL owners recently ruled teams would be fined if players take the knee during the national anthem. They're protesting racism and police brutality, though the owners said they can stay in the locker room. Former President Bill Clinton is facing criticism after he told NBC's Craig Melvin that he did not owe an apology to former White House intern Monica Lewinsky.
Well, I asked if you'd ever apologized, and you said you had.
I have.
You've apologized to her.
I apologize to everybody in the world.
It is important to me that everybody who has been hurt know that the sorrow I feel is genuine. First and most important, my family, Monica Lewinsky and her family.
But you didn't apologize to her.
I have not talked to her.
Do you feel like you owe her an apology?
No, I do. I do not. I've never talked to her, but I did say publicly on more than one occasion that I was sorry. That's very different. The apology was public.
After widespread outrage about these comments, Clinton said he had apologized publicly to Monica Lewinsky. He was speaking last night at the Schomburg Center in New York. In the late 90s, President Clinton had a sexual affair with Lewinsky, who was at the time a 21-year-old unpaid intern at the White House. In a Vanity Fair essay published earlier this year, Lewinsky wrote, quote, "I now see how problematic it was that the two of us even got to a place where there was a question of consent. Instead, the road that led there was littered with inappropriate abuse of authority, station, and privilege," she wrote. And in Parkland, Florida, 4 high school seniors who were killed in the Valentine's Day massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, which killed 17 people in total, were honored at the high school's graduation Sunday night. Among them, Joaquin Oliver, whose mother accepted her son's diploma and cap and tassel while wearing a bright yellow T-shirt reading, "This should be my son." On Monday, students who survived the shooting massacre announced plans for a nationwide 2-month bus tour this summer aimed at registering young people to vote and to support gun control legislation. This is student Cameron Caskey.
Out there do not want a lot of young people voting. There are a lot of politicians who want marginalized communities staying out of the polls because they know they will be voted out. I think that a lot of people have slowly been less excited in voting because people are getting tired of the political system. But the thing is, we can fix the political system.
To see our full coverage of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School massacre and the student-led March for Our Lives, go to democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Monday marked President Trump's 500th day in office, and many legal experts warn the country could soon face a constitutional crisis as the president continues to attack special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. On Monday, Trump tweeted, quote, "The appointment of the special counsel is totally unconstitutional." He also tweeted, as has been stated by numerous legal scholars, "I have the absolute right to pardon myself." Later on Monday, NBC's White House reporter Peter Alexander questioned the White House press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
Let me ask you if I can. Does the president believe that he is above the law?
Certainly not. The president hasn't done anything wrong.
The question isn't if he's done anything wrong. I guess the question is, does the president believe the framers envisioned a system where the president couldn't pardon himself, where the president could be above the law?
Certainly the Constitution very clearly lays out the law. And once again, the president hasn't done anything wrong, and we feel very comfortable in that front.
I know, but you just a moment ago said it's not that clear. So I guess simply put, does the president believe he is above the law?
Certainly no one is above the law.
Over the weekend, the New York Times published a 20-page confidential letter written by Trump's lawyers to special counsel Robert Mueller, in which his lawyers claim Trump is above the law and thus cannot have illegally obstructed the Mueller investigation. In the January 29 letter, they claim, quote, "It remains our position that the president's actions here, by virtue of his position as the chief law enforcement officer, could neither constitutionally nor legally constitute obstruction, because that would amount to him obstructing himself, and that he could, if he wished, terminate the inquiry or even exercise his power to pardon if he so desired." Trump's attorneys also claim the Constitution gives the president power to terminate the Mueller probe. We go now to Philadelphia, where we're joined by Will Bunch, longtime columnist for the Philadelphia Daily News. The latest column is headlined, "The Week Trump Went Full Dictator and No One Tried to Stop Him." Respond to these latest developments and comments of both President Trump reinforcing this letter that the New York Times got hold of and released this weekend.
Yeah. Hi, Amy. Hi, Juan. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I wrote that column over the weekend before this extraordinary tweet from President Trump yesterday in which he claimed that he has the ability to pardon himself. You mentioned it's been 500 days of President Trump, and it's day by day we've seen him slowly eroding democratic norms, the rule of law rules, and when he does that step by step, he not only erodes our democracy, but he's taking us on a path from a presidency to some kind of dictatorship where he's basically, like he said, declaring himself above the law. I mean, the 20-page letter from his lawyers to Robert Mueller was stunning in the claims that he can shut down the investigation, that he can fire anybody in the Justice Department who's investigating him at will, and that he has the right to pardon anybody, Michael Flynn, Michael Cohen, and himself, perhaps, although that theory has yet to be tested. So this is clearly a dangerous time for democracy. Again, we've seen it just erode step by step. The fact that he gets away with telling an average of 30 lies a day to the American people and goes unchallenged on that. In so many ways, and the flip side of that is the founders always thought that we'd be protected against that because Congress, the courts, our institutions, the media would step in if somebody was that abusive to our fundamental democracy and take action. But we have a Congress that's totally cowed. The Republicans have completely thrown in with Trump, and the Democrats haven't really adopted an aggressive strategy on how to counter this. The media is debating whether to call a lie, and he is really strengthening this hold over our reality in ways that are very dangerous.
And Will, talking about calling a lie, for months and months, President Trump continued to say that he was ready to talk to the special prosecutor, and he was looking forward to it. And yet here, this letter that the Times released shows that back in January, they were already claiming that he doesn't want to talk to Mueller, that they believe that Mueller has all the information he needs, and that the president basically doesn't have the time. It was stunning that yet he has continued to say that he's willing to talk to the special prosecutor.
Right. It is stunning, Juan. And of course, something else emerged in that letter, too, which is the fact that the official storyline out of the White House about their initial explanation of this Trump Tower meeting with the Russian emissaries in 2016, the issue was whether President Trump had been personally involved in drafting this statement claiming that the meeting was only about adoptions and nothing else. And, there wasn't a discussion of dirt about Hillary Clinton. The White House had initially denied that Trump had done that. And now in their own letter, they admit that Trump did, in fact, dictate this statement. And, Sarah Sanders was pressed on this yesterday, and she doesn't have a good answer. And this has just been a hallmark of the Trump administration, just blatant lying. I mean, obviously, Donald Trump is not the first president to lie. We've been through LBJ and Vietnam and Watergate and all these other things. But in this case, I mean, the sheer brazenness of it. And, this gets back to the whole issue of democracy versus dictatorship, because what really makes a dictator is the ability to redefine reality, right? So the more that Trump and his aides like Sarah Sanders and his lawyers can come out and just state these blatant untruths, and he's still, and nothing. You wake up the next day and nothing's really changed. The more dangerous our situation becomes.
We've been doing a lot of reflecting back 50 years later in 1968. Now, this is, not quite 50 years, maybe more like 41 years, but it was after Nixon resigned, the famous interview that he did with David Frost.
Can decide that it's in the best interest of the nation or something, and do something illegal.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
By definition.
Exactly.
So that was Nixon after he resigned in 1977. Will Bunch, can you compare Nixon and Trump?
Yeah, absolutely. Amy, I came of age during Watergate. I mean, that's what kind of made me want to go into journalism as a young man. And one of the lessons, supposedly, of Watergate was that we proved that no one is above the law because Nixon had to resign. He was forced out of office. The truth is, we obviously never really resolved that question, unfortunately. I mean, first of all, the muddies were watered when Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon. So in a way, he was above the law. He did commit crimes and was not sent to jail or punished for them. And so you had a situation where 3 years later, Nixon, instead of being in jail, is a free man, and he's making this claim that when the president does it, it's not illegal. I think the vast majority of Americans totally disagree with that statement, and yet we've never really resolved that question. And now we have a president who's determined to push this to the outer limit. He's determined to blow by every tradition, every norm, every rule, and he's basically challenging us to say, what are we going to do about this? He's challenging Congress, he's challenging the media, he's challenging the American people. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to sit on our couches and watch this on TV every night? Are we going to take to the streets? What are we going to do as he gets more and more brazen? And this is really the question we have to resolve, because if the president can show that he's above the law, that just erodes the underpinnings of our democracy in so many ways. It's a very risky time.
And of course, even the fact that a president can't pardon someone, and Trump claims, including himself, doesn't mean that a crime was not committed, because you're obviously being pardoned for having broken the law in one way or another. I wanted to ask you about the issue of forbearance that you talk about in your column in the Philadelphia Daily News. Could you expand on that? Explain your approach on the issue of forbearance.
Absolutely. This is a term in terms of politics that I wasn't familiar with until this really excellent book came out this year called How Democracies Die. It's by Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt. They're two political scientists from Harvard. And, they talk about how democracies die and what the road to dictatorship looks like. And one of the important things is forbearance means basically you may have some powers that are not denied to you in the Constitution or that you theoretically could exercise, but forbearance means you don't use all your powers to the hilt, because that puts you over the edge. So pardons are a perfect example of that. The Constitution really doesn't make clear, gives the president an absolute power to issue pardons. So he can pardon his best friend. He can pardon Michael Cohen theoretically under the law, but tradition has restrained us from doing that. What's actually happened over the last 242 years is we've developed a system. People generally who want pardons from the president make an application. It goes to the Justice Department. There's a lengthy review process. Things are taken into consideration, like whether that person has redeemed themselves in some ways. Trump's pardon process is none of this. He's playing a game of celebrity apprentice with the pardon process in terms of people he knows, people who are powerful, people who are political allies like Joe Arpaio. I mean, when I say democracy's eroded over 500 days, go back about halfway to his term when he issued that first pardon to Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who hadn't even been brought to justice yet for violating the rights of immigrants down in Arizona. Basically, that was the first challenge to say, this pardon process is completely abnormal. He hasn't even been sentenced yet, and I'm issuing him a pardon. He basically was challenging the system. What are you going to do about this? And the answer was nothing. Joe Arpaio's a free man. I think he's even running for office down there. So, this emboldens him. So then he can pardon Dinesh D'Souza. He can pardon Scooter Libby. When there's no uproar about that, it just makes it so much easier for him to pardon someone like Michael Flynn or someone like his own lawyer, Michael Cohen. And so that's forbearance. It's kind of going past the guardrails of democracy that all of Trump's predecessors have followed.
So what can people do? For example, Congress. What do Democrats and the minority have the power to do? And what would happen if they became the majority in November? And what about Republicans if the president has absolute power?
Well, in the short term, November, unfortunately, seems like a long time away in Trump years, right? So, I think it's possible, that the Democrats could peel off some moderate Republicans for certain measures, such as legislation that would prevent Trump from firing Robert Mueller. I think that could get some Republican support. Whether the leadership would allow a vote on that is another thing. But I think the Democrats really need to make it clear to the people that if they can gain a majority in the November election, that they're going to start a full-blown investigation of the Trump administration with impeachment on the table. I don't think you can run right now and say I'm a yes vote on impeachment, because we haven't had the process yet that we had in 1973 and 1974 of hearings and producing the evidence. But the evidence is there to be produced. A Democratic Congress is going to have subpoena power and more power to gather the information that the public needs. And, the abuses of the Trump administration have been so dramatic, it really probably shouldn't take that much time to develop a case for impeachment. And, there's an argument against impeachment, obviously, which is that you'll never get enough Republican votes in the Senate to convict and remove Trump. And so what's the point? But on the other hand, when you look at everything Trump has done, his violations of the emoluments clause, his selling our foreign policy to the highest bidder, whether it's Russia, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's the United Arab Emirates, and now his obstruction of justice in the Mueller case, if Donald Trump can't be impeached, then why do we even have an impeachment provision in the Constitution? Because he's just a prima facie case.
Yeah, I'd like to turn to another Trump subject that is perhaps closer to you and the people of Philadelphia. Yeah. On Monday evening, Donald Trump abruptly called off today's planned visit by the Super Bowl winning Philadelphia Eagles after it became clear that most of the team had opted out of the event. In a statement announcing the decision, Trump said, quote, "The Philadelphia Eagles are unable to come to the White House with their full team to be celebrated tomorrow. They disagree with their president because he insists that they proudly stand for the national anthem, hand on heart, in honor of the great men and women of our military and the people of our country." He also tweeted last night saying, quote, "Unfortunately, only a small number of players decided to come, and we canceled the event. Staying in the locker room for the playing of our national anthem is as disrespectful to our country as kneeling. Sorry."
But what's interesting is not a single Eagles player kneeled during the national anthem in the 2017 season. Compare that to Seattle Seahawks, which was, I think, something like 110 times. Several members of the Philadelphia Eagles announced in February they wouldn't visit the White House for the traditional Super Bowl victory celebration as a protest against President Trump. Among them, Malcolm Jenkins and Torrey Smith, as well as Chris Long. Long also refused to visit the White House last year when he played for the New England Patriots, who won the Super Bowl then. Jenkins is part of a players' coalition that's partnered with the NFL to commit at least $90 million to programs combating social inequality. In April, Eagles quarterback Carson Wentz announced he would match up to $500,000 in donations to raise money to build a sports complex in Haiti. Eagles defensive end Chris Long donated his entire 2017 base salary, worth $1 million, to charity. And Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney released a statement Monday night responding to the Eagles' canceled White House visit, saying, quote, "Disinviting them from the White House only proves that our president is not a true patriot, but a fragile egomaniac obsessed with crowd size and afraid of the embarrassment of throwing a party to which no one wants to attend." Will Bunch, as we wrap up right now, your comments.
Well, I couldn't really say it any better than Jim Kenney just said it. I mean, that basically sums it up. Donald Trump has done something that people in Philadelphia have unsuccessfully been trying to do for decades, which is he's totally brought this city together. People in Philadelphia are, just outraged. They're angered and disgusted by the small-mindedness that Trump has displayed here. And, I'm so glad you mentioned all the things that the Eagles have done over the last year in humanitarian efforts and social justice, because, the Eagles are such a classy organization. And say what you will about the NFL, but the individual players on the Eagles, many of them are fighting for social justice. Many of them are giving back to the community, raising money, doing things for charity. Donald Trump could have learned so much from these people, and instead he turned them away because he's a very small man. He's like what Jimmy Breslin said about Giuliani. A small man in search of a balcony, and that side of Donald Trump has been totally exposed by this. But just one thing I'll say politically, and people haven't thought much about this, but, Trump only won Pennsylvania in 2016 by about 69,000 votes. And he got a decent number of votes in the suburbs outside of Philadelphia where the Eagles are just worshipped. And on top of everything else that's dumb about this, it's a very dumb move politically. People in Philadelphia, I mean, Trump was not popular in Philadelphia to begin with, but he's even managed to alienate people even more with this petty, small-minded move of his.
Interesting that you wrote, I nearly quit watching the NFL. The humanity of Malcolm Jenkins and Chris Long brought me back. I mean, you might as easily see them walking the halls of the state legislature, lobbying around issues of criminal justice and prison reform. Will Bunch, I want to thank you.
Yes, they've been doing that. They've been going to prisons. They're great guys, yeah.
I want to thank you very much
Amy.
for being with us. Will Bunch is a longtime columnist for the Philadelphia Daily News. His latest column, The Week Trump Went Full Dictator, and No One Tried to Stop Him. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we go to the border. Some rare video inside a courtroom. What's happening to children? Hundreds of them? Is it thousands of them? Taken away from their parents by the Trump administration? Stay with us.
Mr. President, 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 now your weapons, Mr. President, my distraction, Mr. President, I won't swallow, Mr. President, your concoctions, yeah, Mr. President, I can tell, Mr. President, from your eyes, Mr. President, oh, you beat me, Mr. President, your lies, Mr. President, fill your pockets, Mr. President, with black gold, Mr. President, time to pay back, Mr. President. What you sold, Mr. President? Time to pay back, Mr. President. Hey, payback time, payback time. Wait, wait, wait. Kiwa wizi, we utanyongwa. Kiwa wizi, we utanyongwa. That means you're a thief. You're gonna go
Mr. President, Soul Jazz Orchestra. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We turn now to the U.S.-Mexico border, where a reporter obtained a recording of immigrant parents who have been separated from their children. The audio is from a mass trial of dozens of immigrants in a courtroom in Brownsville, Texas. Standing shoulder to shoulder, men and women in shackles plead guilty to the crime of illegal entry during a mass trial. If you listen closely, you can hear the clinking of their chains as federal magistrate Judge Ronald Morgan asks a man if he would like to say anything before he is sentenced.
Anything else you wish to say then before sentence? Okay. Mr. Hernandez Rodriguez, anything you wish to say before sentence?
Sí, también sobre mi hijo, yo lo traigo conmigo. Aquí me lo separaron y.
Also, I was bringing my child with me, and I got separated. They got separated. We got separated.
Okay. And like I just told Mr. Hernandez Lopez, my understanding of the way it's supposed to work is because you're from a country other than Mexico, you're going to be sent to a camp, and you're going to be sent to a camp where your child will be allowed to join you. That's my understanding of how it's supposed to work. You understand that?
Sí.
How old is your child?
6 años.
6 years.
Me preocupa bastante porque no sé, me duele saber que me lo van a dejar aquí y a mí me van a mandar o.
I'm very worried because they may leave me here and then I'm going to get deported.
Well, you're supposed to be joined with your child before you are deported. And if Mr. Hernandez Lopez, let me just tell you, the theory is that's going to keep you from coming to this country.
That audio of federal magistrate Judge Ronald Morgan's courtroom in Brownsville, Texas, is from a report for The Intercept by Debbie Nathan, headlined Hidden Horrors of Zero Tolerance, Mass Trials and Children Taken from Their Parents. The story also features a rare photograph from inside a federal courthouse in Pecos, Texas, that shows dozens of immigrants in orange jumpsuits spread across a courtroom and filling up a jury box as they are all tried at once.
Mass trials for crossing the border, scattered cases of family separations have taken place since Operation Streamline was first introduced in 2005. But last month, Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced the federal government will now prosecute, quote, 100% of illegal southwest border crossings.
I have put in place a zero-tolerance policy for illegal entry on our southwest border. If you cross the border unlawfully, then we will prosecute you. It's that simple. If you smuggle illegal aliens across our border, then we will prosecute you. If you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you. And that child may be separated from you as required by law.
Well, for more on this new policy, how it's unfolding, we go to Austin, Texas, where we're joined by Debbie Nathan, independent journalist, usually based in Brownsville, Texas, on the Mexico border. Her new report for The Intercept, Hidden Horrors of Zero Tolerance, Mass Trials in Children Taken from Their Parents. She's been on the ground reporting on what she calls zero tolerance factories. Describe what you saw, Debbie.
I've been to several of these trials. I've been in Brownsville, Laredo, and El Paso, and what you see is somewhere between 20 and 40-something people, all triple shackled, not to each other, but individually, their hands in handcuffs chained to their waists and their feet shackled, and they clunk and or clang into court. I mean, there's this clanging sound of chains, and they go through these mass processes in less than an hour usually, and they often they are instructed to answer in groups or answer en masse. So you'll hear like 40 people being asked a question, and they'll say "sí" all at once, or they'll say "no," and it's just it's really uncanny. It's shocking. It doesn't feel like due process. One after one after one after one after one, with only one lawyer. They plead guilty, culpable, 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 culpable. I mean, it's just, it just feels like something out. I mean, the photo itself, added to the sounds, really makes you think of something like Abu Ghraib, except that it's completely legal in this country now to do this to people. It's just quite shocking to see. And, you know, very few people go to see it, which I think is another reason why it's happening on the border and with so little oversight. I've had trouble getting into courtrooms. I go to get into the federal building, and I'm told, no, the judge said that the courtroom is too crowded. Nobody can go in except for Border Patrol agents and lawyers. And I've had to argue to get in, even after I've said I was a reporter. So people don't see these proceedings, and people are afraid to argue, actually. So the fact that this photo was taken is actually very remarkable. The defense bar that I spoke with in that area, that's the Western District of Texas, said that they think that it was a marshal who took it. Somebody inside the court secretly took it, probably. And my experience hanging around these courtrooms and talking to people, and even having a little bit of whistleblower effect, is that there are a lot of people inside these courtrooms or inside these courthouses who are not comfortable with what's going on. In fact, if we were able to continue to listen to the judge in that tape, he even starts to feel real anxiety, expresses anxiety about the fact that maybe it's not true that people are being reunited in these camps,
Debbie,
as he
if
calls
we can,
them,
let's go
with their children, which is not true.
Debbie, if we
and
can,
he actually goes on to say to the assistant U.S. attorney, if this is not true, if you're not reuniting these children, then we can imagine the hell that's being created. So the judge, I mean, there's so many people who are not comfortable with what's going on.
Well, if we can, let's go to the audio recording you obtained from the Brownsville, Texas courtroom of federal magistrate Judge Ronald Morgan, as he's presiding over the mass trials of these folks who were apprehended at the border. This was in late April, and this begins with Judge Morgan offering another defendant the chance to address him before she was sentenced.
Ms. Diaz-Castro, anything you'd like to say before sentence?
El mismo caso de ellos que mi hija, solo que a ella no me la han separado, pero me dijeron que sí me la iban a quitar.
the same case as theirs. Only they haven't separated me from my daughter, but they told me they were going to take her away.
Well, let's hope they don't. You and your daughter, they should be joined together. Let me just ask, Ms. DeAndre, my understanding is that where there is parent and child, the parent and child are supposed to be joined before they are separated and sent home. Is that correct?
That's what I've heard, Your Honor, as well.
Tell you what, if it's not, then a lot of folks have some answering to do. Because what you've done, in effect, by separating these children, is you're putting them someplace without their parent. You can imagine there's a hell, and that's probably what it looks like. You best confirm that's the case. You best make sure that's the case.
Yes, Your Honor.
Again, that was Federal Magistrate Judge Ronald Morgan speaking in his Brownsville, Texas courtroom in late April in this audio that Debbie Nathan obtained for her report in The Intercept. Debbie, this whole issue of lawyers, one lawyer representing 30, 40, 50 people, obviously they can't have much in terms of individual information about that particular person or what might have driven them to try to cross the border to begin with.
Yeah, what I've heard is that they're getting somewhere between 7 and 10 minutes of counsel right before the proceedings. And, you know, I've talked to public defenders who try very, very hard to get information that would be helpful to the I was going to say client, but to the defendant. For example, who really make an effort to find out whether they crossed with their children and whether they have a claim, a credible fear claim that would allow them to later in the process claim asylum. But it seems so inconsistent. Like, I was in court in El Paso last week, and there were 60 defendants, and they were split into 3 groups of 20. And so each group of 20 had a lawyer. And I interviewed one lawyer who told me that of his 20, not one of them had been separated from a child, and not one of them had an asylum claim or a credible fear claim. So then in the third group, I was able to interview the attorney who spoke Spanish, unlike the first one, and seemed very, very concerned about the immigration issues. And he told me that of the 20 that I saw him representing, 10 of them had been separated from a total of 15 children, including one woman who was separated from 3 children. And, you know, he obtained that information by just really speaking with these people. So you get the feeling that, you know, the legal representation, as short as it is, as few minutes as it is, also depends on whether the lawyers even care, you know, to find out what's going on.
You know, in also where you are, where you usually work in Brownsville, Oregon Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley was barred from entering a detention center, which was an old Walmart. It's a detention center for immigrant children, just Sunday, after traveling to the center to see firsthand the Trump administration's practice of separating immigrant children from their parents. He tweeted, "I was barred entry, asked repeatedly to speak to a supervisor. He finally came out and said he can't tell us anything. Police were called on us. Children should never be ripped from their families and held in secretive detention centers," he tweeted. Federal authorities reportedly separating at least 600 immigrant children from their parents last month, sparking widespread outrage and international condemnation. Even a U.S. senator is being escorted away by police, not allowed to go into the old Walmart where children are being held that we are paying for. Debbie.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. It was, you know, sort of the same experience, only in spades, of what I've had when I've tried to go into court. It seems like everybody is just being treated like some bum that knocks on the door. You know, like, what are you doing here? And, you know, we're going to call the cops on you. I mean, it was, in a way, shocking to see him treated that way. I saw the video yesterday, but it wasn't surprising to me. Nobody can get in there.
Debbie, I want to turn to an interview you did with migrants you met in Mexico, just across the border from El Paso. This clip from a video you posted on Twitter this weekend begins with you asking the migrants if they tried to cross the bridge to the United States at that port of entry.
Did you try to cross the bridge?
Yes, we want to cross the bridge, but they do not allow us.
What happened when you tried to cross?
We want to seek help to enter the U.S.
What's your name?
My name is Chico.
We want to enter the United States because we want to find a job. We have debts. We owe a lot because we are far from our country.
What will happen to you if... Do you fear violence there?
Yes, of course. If we do not pay our debts, the money we owe, they will threaten or kill us.
So, Debbie, can you explain? These are the U.S. agents crossing. Are they crossing into Mexico before even the border crossings point that the migrants would try to get through?
So traditionally, you go to the port of entry which is this big building at the bottom. You know, now in Brownsville, it's a big curved bridge, and you go to the bottom of the bridge to the U.S. side to the port of entry, and you tell the agents that you want to request asylum, and that is your legal right. You're in the United States at that point, and you request asylum. So what's been happening up and down the border is, and this has been going on probably for at least a year and a half that I'm aware of anyway, is that they're putting agents up at the top of the bridge because, you know, there's sort of an invisible line, which is often marked with a plaque, but there's a line dividing the United States and Mexico. So they want, what the government wants at this point is for people not to be able to step into the United States at that invisible line because then they can't apply for asylum. And so they've got these agents at the top of the bridge, and they're standing there, and they're asking everybody who they're suspicious about, you know, and suspicious of not, you know, of maybe they're going to apply for asylum, but asking people for their documents, and then they won't let people go into the United States. So, I mean, it's almost like they're not even in Mexico. Technically, they're in Mexico, but they're like 6 inches from the United States. And that's illegal. I mean, that's against American law, and it's against international law. But that's what's happening up and down the border, and that's what I observed when I was in El Paso last week. And I interviewed those people who had been turned back. They'd already been turned back about 3 times and told, oh, come back come back at 10 o'clock tonight, or come back at 6 in the morning. We don't have room for you now. So they were camped out in front of a bathroom at the bottom of the bridge, which is the Mexico side. And you know, again, incredibly upsetting to see them really looking hungry and looking exhausted and weeping, and telling me that they have multiple times tried to get past these agents, and that they were not able to.
Debbie Nathan, you also have a new report out for The Intercept that's headlined, Border Patrol Continues to Exaggerate Danger to Agents to Justify Violence Against Immigrants. I want to ask you about this and how it relates to the Border Patrol officer who just shot through the head, the 19-year-old indigenous Guatemalan woman, Claudia Gomez, killing her. This in Rio Bravo, Texas. Video of the aftermath of the killing shows Border Patrol agents sealing off the scene and detaining at least 2 people. The agents first claimed the officer fired in self-defense after officers were attacked by blunt objects. The family of Claudia Gomez Gonzalez said she set off for a better life in the United States despite what they had heard about tougher policies towards undocumented immigrants under Donald Trump. This is Gomez's mother, Lydia Gonzalez.
I'm going to achieve something, she said. I'll earn money for my studies, she said. But unfortunately, she wasn't able to do that. Immigration killed my little girl, my little baby. No, no, no. She didn't go to steal. She's just gone, my baby. That's how it is. I just want justice for my girl because it's not fair for them to do this. Now, if people are able to help me retrieve my baby's body as soon as possible, that's what I want. We can't do anything else now. She's dead. She's dead.
So, Debbie Nathan, if you can talk about Border Patrol continuing to exaggerate the danger to agents to justify violence against immigrants, this horrific story about the shooting death of Claudia.
Yeah, a few months ago, I started investigating the claims the Border Patrol's been making for about the past several months that it's a very dangerous job and that their assault statistics were way, way up from last year. And I got data from the Border Patrol which showed that, in fact, assaults were down and injuries are down, but they were using this accounting method. They were counting in this very strange, unconventional way. And, for example, what I was told from law enforcement people is that, you know, police and law enforcement officials usually, like, if somebody's assaulted, that's considered one assault. I mean, somebody could throw 7 rocks at you, and that would be, and you're one agent, so that's counted as one assault. But the Border Patrol was, or still is, I guess, multiplying the number of agents assaulted. And by the way, an assault doesn't necessarily cause an injury. And in most cases with the Border Patrol, it doesn't. But multiplying the number of agents assaulted by the number of perpetrators and the number of weapons. So the example that they gave me was 6 agents assaulted by 7 perpetrators who used a water bottle, a rock, and a tree branch. So when you multiply and multiply and multiply, you get 126 assaults. Conventionally, that would be counted as 6 assaults. And remember that actually the spokesperson did not respond when I asked if any of the agents had been hurt. So what I found out as I continued and did the second report was that injuries are down according to other methods that you can look at, objective methods to look at injuries in the Border Patrol. And the way that this relates to the young woman who was killed is that she was actually killed about a mile from a case that I'm aware of where a very tiny Guatemalan who looks to me like he was a teenager was running from Border Patrol agents, I guess in the same way that the woman in this group was running a year later. He was running, and there was a melee that ensued in which he was accused of assaulting a Border Patrol agent. But he elected to go to trial, or he was put on trial, and he was acquitted. And it was explained to me by the public defenders in the Southern District that their assumption was that the jury just took a look at the size difference between these two people. The agent was this pretty big, burly guy, and the immigrant looked like a little pencil. I mean, he was just this tiny, frail. He probably weighed 100 pounds, and the agent probably weighed at least 160. So they just figured that, plus the immigrant had blood on his ear. His ear was all banged up. And the agent had, I think, like a sprained elbow. So he was acquitted. But what was interesting to me was that will go into that incident, whatever it was about and for which he was acquitted, will go into the statistics as an assault. And what's also very telling to me is that if you listen to the Border Patrol sort of talking to itself, the Border Patrol Council, which is their union, has a podcast which is sponsored by Breitbart, where the hosts sit there and they talk about, they're very anti-immigrant and very sort of feeling sorry for themselves. There's one particular podcast that anybody can listen to where they say, we've just had enough of these assaults and we should be allowed to respond. We should be allowed to use more force, and we should be allowed to. And we should basically be allowed to beat people up. That's what they say.
Debbie Nathan, we want to thank you for being with us. Thank you for all your work on the border as you work from Brownsville, Texas, on the Mexico border. We'll link to your pieces in The Intercept, Hidden Horrors of Zero Tolerance, Mass Trials and Children Taken from the Parents, as well as the piece you just did, Border Patrol Continues to Exaggerate Danger to Agents to Justify Violence Against Immigrants. When we come back, the Supreme Court ruling in favor of a Colorado baker who refused to bake a wedding cake for a gay couple, citing his religious opposition. Stay with us.
Va pasando el trapo sobre la mesa y está cuidando que todo brille como una perla. Cuando llegue la patrona que no se vuelva a quejar, no sea cosa que la acuse de ilegal. O se atiende los jardines, parecen de Disneyland. Maneja una troca vieja sin la licencia. No importa si fue taxista allá en su tierra natal.
Santa Cecilia, performing in our Democracy Now! Studios. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, the Supreme Court ruled Monday in favor of a Colorado baker who refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple, citing his religious opposition. In a narrow 7-2 decision, the justices faulted the Colorado Civil Rights Commission's handling of the claims brought against Baker Jack Phillips, saying the commission had showed hostility to religion. The case wound its way to the Supreme Court after a Colorado Court of Appeals decision affirmed the commission's earlier decision that Masterpiece Cake Shop in Lakewood, Colorado, and its owner, Jack Phillips, violated the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act when he declined to make a cake for Charlie Craig and David Mullins' wedding reception in 2012.
Though the case pitted claims of religious freedom against the fight for gay rights, the ruling stopped short of setting a major precedent on whether businesses can deny people services because of their sexual orientation. For more, we're joined by Ria Tabak-Omar, a senior staff attorney with the ACLU's LGBT and HIV Project, counsel of record for Charlie Craig and David Mullins, and Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. How significant is this ruling? And let's not forget the newest justice, Neil Gorsuch, comes from Colorado.
That's right, Amy. Well, obviously the decision is deeply disappointing for our clients, Dave and Charlie, as well as Charlie's mother, Debbie, who was with them there that day and hoped to help her son select his wedding cake. And, of course, the experience ended up being very different. But let's be clear, this was not the win the bakery had asked for, or the Trump administration, which had backed the bakery in the case. You know, as Juan indicated, the court reversed based on peculiar facts in the history of the Civil Rights Commission's handling of this case. Those facts aren't likely to be repeated anytime soon. And in the process, the court recognized that Colorado can and should act to prevent the harms of discrimination in the marketplace, including when it comes to LGBT people.
And is that perhaps why two of the liberal justices of the court voted with the majority on this case? Do you have any sense on those particular justices?
Well, so Justice Kagan and Justice Breyer joined the Justice Kennedy's majority opinion for the court. And Justice Kagan wrote separately to add some clarification. But it's clear that the majority of the court thought that what happened here, as I mentioned, was peculiar. They weren't happy with the Civil Rights Commission's handling of the case, but they all agreed that those issues were specific to the facts of this case. There was no need to reach the broader questions and, again, hand the bakery the broad victory it had asked for. Remember, the bakery here was asking for a constitutional right to discriminate based not only on the freedom of religion and the freedom of speech. The court didn't engage with that claim at all.
So explain what happened that day when the family went in to order a cake for their same-sex wedding. And just in non-legalese, why it was this is so narrow that you're actually not deeply concerned about this. I mean, clearly Sonia Sotomayor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg were concerned.
Well, I think Justice Sotomayor and Ginsburg were concerned about the very real harm that our clients experienced. And so, to your question, Amy, back in 2012, Dave and Charlie were planning their wedding. Remember, this is before the Obergefell decision. They could not yet legally marry in Colorado. So they were planning a ceremony in Massachusetts, reception back home in Denver. Charlie's mom was planning to be in town for a work trip, and so they waited until she could be there to go to the cake shop to select their wedding cake. And almost as soon as they walked in the door, they're turned away and told, we won't do cakes for same-sex weddings, without any discussion of what they might have been seeking to order. That, of course, is devastating. The family left. They retreated to the car. They broke down in tears. Charlie turned to his mother for comfort. And those are the very real harms that I think really motivated Justices Sotomayor and Ginsburg to dissent.
Mm-hmm. But the ruling, why it is not as significant as people feared?
So the bakery here had claimed that the freedom of religion or the freedom of speech essentially give them a blank check to violate Colorado's Anti-Discrimination Act and discriminate against people based on sexual orientation. It's worth noting that argument, if accepted, would not have been limited to discrimination against LGBT people and could have implicated many of the other characteristics protected under Colorado law, including race, religion, and disability. And the court didn't go that far. Instead, it said it had concerns about the way the Civil Rights Commission had handled this particular case. But in the process of doing that, it repeatedly underscored the significance of laws like Colorado's Anti-Discrimination Act, which have a long and storied history, dating in this case to 1885, the Reconstruction era. So you see the majority really understood the significance of laws like these to our ability to participate freely in the marketplace. And the court today said the same is true when it comes to people who are LGBT.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being with us. Ria Tabaco-Marr, Senior Staff Attorney with the ACLU, the Counsel of Record for Charlie Craig and David Mullins and Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. Tune in Wednesday, tomorrow, for our special on Puerto Rico. The hour will be spent with Naomi Klein, Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, and Katia Aviles-Vasquez. Juan Gonzalez and I will be interviewing them. Democracy Now! Is accepting applications for our paid video production fellowships. Find out more at democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Renee Phelps, Nermeen Shea, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Honey Masood, Tarina Nadura, Nat Needham, and Libby Runny. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us.